All right, our last speaker is Eric DeWeaver, NSF. Here he is. I think you all know Eric. Many of you do. He is now the sort of the lead of the interagency working group. And thank you. Go ahead.
How do I do the slides?
The slides should come up. Do you have a slide? Did you?
Yeah, I did.
I
You
don't have any
a
slides
package?
for you. The back here.
No, but the slides aren't showing.
Um,
Do you have a package?
We don't have any slides for you at the
oh,
moment.
all right. So that makes, that would perhaps simplify the presentation a little bit. So I'm Eric DeWeaver. I work at the National Science Foundation. And I've been associated with this project officially since 2012. And what I had in mind to say actually doesn't really add anything to what you've already heard. I came to this project, I think, when all the heavy lifting had already been done. Many of you in this room understand the history of this much better than I do. I think the only point that I really wanted to make in speaking is that it would be difficult for people who haven't had a lot of experience with NSF and haven't been grantees of the agency to fully understand just how unusual all of this is. When I look at what happened at NSF, Cosmic came to NSF because of Jay Fine. I took over the program that he was running when he retired, and I had a chance to talk to him about this, and I attended meetings. But still, I have no idea how he did what he did. It's not. I don't think anybody at NSF really knows how he was able to do the things that he did. And I don't know that that's because I didn't get to NSF while those things were going on. I would imagine that even people who were there the whole time would have a really hard time figuring out how he managed to sort of punch above his weight the way he did. And I just one of the things that was interesting about Jay is that Jay was perhaps the best listener I've ever met. And I would see him do this. Most of us, when we have a conversation, we wait impatiently until it's our turn to talk because we're interested in what we have to say. And he would sit there for half an hour listening to you, and it seemed to me that the way Cosmic came to NSF and also GPS Med is that Jay listened to Rick. And we were talking about 30 years of RO. It's hard for me to imagine there was ever a time when Rick wasn't working on RO. I could easily imagine Rick being born talking about RO. And the first time I ever encountered Rick was when I was a graduate student in the 1990s, and Rick came to my university to give a presentation on radio occultation. And I didn't know who he was at the time, but it was clear that he felt that he was onto something. And it seems to me as though Rick has been pushing that rock uphill for most of his natural life. And I think that, Rick is calling Jay sort of a superhero of radio occultation, but I think Rick certainly shares that honor with Jay. I mean, I think it's certainly the case that none of us would be here in this room today if it wasn't for Rick. And I would say also for the fact that Jay listened to Rick. And I think this is one of the parts of this that, if I ask myself, which of these things are NSF like, considering how odd and unusual this is for NSF, and which of them are not NSF like, there is kind of a desire within NSF to be community driven. That is part of the DNA of the agency, and so when you see someone like Jay, assuming there is a category of people like Jay listening to Rick, then yes, that's what you're supposed to do. And the power of that, I think, is to have somebody inside the agency who has a similar kind of scientific vision to the people who come to him from outside the agency and have an alignment of vision. That's when things really happen. Some of you may have seen the Oppenheimer movie that came out a couple of years ago. The relationship between Leslie Groves and Robert Oppenheimer is the key to the success of the Manhattan Project. The person who was funding this on the government side really understood at a deep level what the scientists were doing, and I think there's a lot of talk at NSF about the co-generation, the co-production of knowledge. most of the time, what that means is that scientists should be spending more of their time talking to stakeholders. I think it's generally forgotten that scientific funding is also a matter of co-generation of knowledge. You know, that the people who are funding this stuff are working with the people who are doing the actual science to get something done. And I think the power of the agency comes from its ability to have that relationship between the people inside the agency and the people external to the agency who are doing the actual work. And so I think that in itself, I think, is a very NSF-like thing. The problem is, so I had this talk that I created, and I didn't upload it in time, so I think it's missing. But the title of my talk was 30 Years of Proving the Concept, right? Now that's the part that's not NSF-like, right? We don't do 30 years, right? Most of my time, 90% of my time or more, is spent reviewing proposals for 3-year projects. Right. The expectation is that you're going to do these 3-year projects and that somehow the sum total of these over time is going to produce scientific advancement. You know, if we look at GPS MET, right? GPS MET is an enormous heavy lift when it comes to, oh, here's a presentation. What do you know?
You might have to go, maybe go towards the last few
all right.
slides.
Yeah, so I'll start here. Yeah, here. GPS MET is $10 million. Right? That's huge for NSF. You know, Dave Ector can sort of look down on that from the vantage point of an agency that might have $1 billion project for a satellite, but $10 billion is a lot for us, right? And so when you have this satellite and you launch it, you know, and then you manage to launch it successfully, you've got this team of people. There are people from JPL involved, other agencies, so on and so forth. You have the Earth's first RO profile. Doesn't that prove the concept, right? You've already hit it out of the park as far as NSF is concerned. And then what happens? Well, you know, I can understand why they might have switched this off because this is proof of concept, right? You've already proved the concept. Somebody else is supposed to take over at this point. This is now out of our wheelhouse as an agency. So it's a shock to realize that no, even at $10 million in a project that took years to produce, he still wasn't done proving the concept. Nobody proves the concept twice at NSF. You never get to do that. Not only that, but we're up an order of magnitude in terms of the size of this thing. 10 is already huge for us. 100 million is unthinkable, right? Especially when 80% of that comes from another country through endless machinations that only Jeff Reeves really understands, right? And so, you know, and here we can see, you know, all the people. There's Jay. I've put a little circle around him because this is typically where you'd see him somewhere in the back of the picture of the group shot. Then you can see Rick, of course, and there's Bill and so on and so forth. But you know, to keep at it for that long, you know, a mission that started in 1992, and here we are in 2006, and we're celebrating the launch, and then this goes on for another decade or more, right? That's unthinkable at an agency like the National Science Foundation, you know. And you know, if I wanted to list the ways that GPS MET and COSMIC are way outside the NSF paradigm, you know, NSF stands for no satellite funding, right? That's the mantra that we normally use. It's not our thing. Go to NASA, go to NOAA, go to the Air Force. And yet it's that. Scaling up, we don't scale up. We hand off to somebody else to scale up, right? Take big risks. How much risk am I taking on if I make a 3-year award to somebody in academia that funds a month of salary and a graduate student? You know, and the expectation is you're going to publish papers and the graduate student is going to graduate. You know, there's no risk involved in our everyday life that's anywhere near comparable to what Dave Ector is describing, where it could go boom. You know, nothing in our lives goes boom like that. And yet here we are. Long-term funding. Again, you know, it's not just the heavy lift, it's the marathon. You know, there's a sort of sense that Sisyphus is the patron saint of bureaucrats because you do the same thing over and over and over again. And you're always pushing that rock uphill and it always ends up at the floor, at the bottom of the mountain overnight. You know, this is what I call Nipperville, right? Nipper is military interdepartmental purchase request. This is how agencies in Department of Defense send money to NSF. You know, there are so many of these things, you know, all the time. This is the pass the hat model, the endless struggle of constantly accepting this money and figuring out how to channel it to where it's going, and writing letters to the different people in the different, in the Air Force and the Navy, telling them, oh, you promised us this money, and then finding out that, oh, they can only give you half of it, and then trying to figure out what's going on with that. That's an endless struggle. Normally we don't do that. That's not what program managers really get paid to do. So I just want to kind of emphasize the ways in which this is unusual, because you might imagine, if you were just a historian, look at this from outside, that, there was some big government program. And of course, we wanted to exploit the signal of opportunity that the GPS transmitter satellites were providing to the world. No, it didn't happen like that at all. It was more like Machiavelli, where you have all these little principalities and city-states, and they're either at war or they're cooperating or they're doing some other thing, and the politics of this is immense. So I'll just say, okay, a question that comes up, could we do this today? There's a lot of reasons for casting doubt on that. And I don't want to get into any of that. Because one of the things that you have to consider is that, yeah, there are these sort of great heroes in any endeavor who really get it off the ground, who really do the heavy lifting. But it may be that the needs are different now, that we have a thriving community. And here I've put the picture, the group shot from the last IROWG meeting, only because we haven't taken ours yet. Because what I mean from that is that, the great lasting legacy of Jay is to build this community, and I think the next step really, as I see it, is that, you build one of these kind of projects outside the normal channels. You do all this heroic heavy lifting, but what you end up with at the end of that process is something of an orphan, right? Because it didn't come out of some big government program, it doesn't belong in any government program. And I think that's the problem that I see that really is the critical issue now. 30 years is an amazing, amazing thing, especially for NSF. But if you're interested in a climate time series, it's actually not that long, right? It's kind of an entry level, if you really want to understand things like climate change. What we really need is 100 years, right? And so I think the question before us now, is not how can we find heroes to do heavy lifting? It's how do we keep this going for 100 years? How do we form the institutional basis for what it would take to sustain this over the long term? And so I'll leave it there. And thanks a lot for your attention.
We don't have time for questions. So thanks very much. We're behind time. Let's get do you have if you want to say something while we're setting up for John's session, that's okay. If it's quick. But come on up here. We have the next session is
Yeah, I'm sorry. So Jay Fine was, was a prince of a man and quite a hero for this community. And it's unusual for a program manager in any agency to take this kind of risk upon himself in his own career. So Eric, can you actually comment on, on Jay and his career and what might have happened if things didn't work out? I mean, I don't want to say it this way, but obviously he was putting his neck out for this community.
So thanks for the afternoon. I think this has been for me, it's been an enjoyable walk down memory lane. I have been involved in UCAR activities for a long time. Only sort of since Cosmic 2 have I gotten into the radio occultation game, and it's been enjoyable, but I've been adjacent and a friend of RO for a long time. Eric, thank you for sponsoring basically a lot of the science out of here for 30 years. We hope to trick you into another proposal here soon. I think that we're thinking about good ideas, but for Cosmic 2, you lived in the land of Mipperville too. I cannot figure out how many MIPRs that you ran through to make sure that Cosmic 2 was going to move forward. We thank you for that. And in that, Jan Weiss is going to come up and sort of talk about what has happened in our latest mission. And then Jens Vickert is going to bring up and sort of talk about and present a series of lectures from an outside perspective, from outside of the US. Jan?
All right, thank you, John. And